born amid the wailing of lamentations and the gnashing of teeth. For winter's heart shall ride a black horse, and the name of it is death. From the Koreathon Cycle, The Prophecies of the Dragon. Prologue. Snow. 3 lanterns cast a flickering light, more than enough to illuminate the small room with its stark white walls and ceiling, but Siain kept her eyes fixed on the heavy wooden door. Illogical, she knew. Foolish in a sitter for the white. The weave of saidar she had pushed around the jamb brought her occasional whispers of distant footsteps in the warren of hallways outside, whispers that faded away almost as soon as heard. A simple thing learned from a friend in her long-ago novice days, but she would have warning long before anyone came near. Few people came down as deep as the second basement, anyway. Her weave picked up the far-off chittering of rats. Light! How long since there had been rats in Tar Valon, in the tower itself? Were any of them spies for the Dark One? She wet her lips uneasily. Logic counted for nothing in this. True, if illogical. She wanted to laugh. With an effort, she crept back from the brink of hysteria. Think of something besides rats. Something besides... A muffled squeal rose in the room behind her, faltered into muted whimpering. She tried to stop up her ears. Concentrate. In a way, she and her companions had been led to this room because the heads of the Ajahs seemed to be meeting in secret. She herself had glimpsed Farana Neheran whispering in a secluded nook of the library with Jessie Bilal, who stood very high among the Browns, if not at the very top. She thought she was on firmer ground concerning Suana Dragond of the Yellows. She thought so. But why had Farana gone walking with Suana in a secluded part of the tower grounds, both swathed in plain cloaks? Sitters of different Ajahs still talked to one another openly, if coldly. The others had seen similar things. They would not give names from their own Ajahs, of course, but 2 had mentioned Farana. A troubling puzzle. The tower was a seething swamp these days, every Ajah at every other Ajah's throat, yet the heads met in corners. No one outside an Ajah knew for certain who within it led, but apparently the leaders knew each other. What could they be up to? What? It was unfortunate that she could not simply ask Farana, but even had Farana been tolerant of anyone's questions, she did not dare. Not now. Concentrate as she would, Siain could not keep her mind on the question. She knew she was staring at the door and worrying at puzzles she could not solve, just to avoid looking over her shoulder, toward the source of those stifled whimpers and snuffling groans. As if thinking of the sounds compelled her, she looked back slowly to her companions, her breath growing more uneven as her head moved by inches. Snow was falling heavily on Tar Valon far overhead, but the room seemed unaccountably hot. She made herself see. Brown-fringed shawl looped on her elbows, Saerin stood with her feet planted apart, fingering the hilt of the curved Altaran dagger thrust behind her belt. Cold anger darkened her olive complexion enough to make the scar along her jaw stand out in a pale line. Tavara appeared calmer at first glance, yet one hand gripped her red-embroidered skirts tightly, and the other held the smooth white cylinder of the oath rod like a foot-long club she was ready to use. She might be ready. Pavara was far tougher than her plump exterior suggested, and determined enough to make Saerin seem a shirker. On the other side of the chair of remorse, tiny Yukiri had her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The long silvery gray fringe on her shawl trembled with her shivers. Licking her lips, Yukiri cast a worried glance at the woman standing beside her. Doacine, looking more like a pretty boy than a yellow sister of considerable repute, displayed no reaction to what they were doing. She was the one actually manipulating the weaves that stretched into the chair, and she stared at the ter'angreal, focusing so hard on her work that perspiration beaded on her pale forehead. They were all sitters, including the tall woman writhing on the chair. Sweat drenched Talene, matting her golden hair, soaking her linen shift till it clung to her. The rest of her clothes made a jumbled pile in a corner. Her closed eyelids fluttered, and she let out a constant stream of strangled moans and mewling half-uttered pleas. Siain felt ill, but could not drag her eyes away. Talene was a friend. Had been a friend. Despite its name, the ter'angreal looked nothing like a chair, just a large rectangular block of marbled gray. Nobody knew what it was made of, but the material was hard as steel everywhere except the slanted top. The statuesque green sank a little into that, and somehow it molded itself to her, no matter how she twisted. Doacine's weavings flowed into the only break anywhere on the chair, a palm-sized rectangular hole in one side, with tiny notches spaced unevenly around it. Criminals caught in Tar Valon were brought down here to experience the chair of remorse, to experience carefully selected consequences of their crimes. On release, they invariably fled the island. There was very little crime in Tar Valon. Queasily, Siain wondered whether this was anything like the use the chair had been put to in the Age of Legends. "What is she seeing?" Her question came out a whisper in spite of herself. Talene would be more than seeing. To her, it all would seem real. Thank the light she had no warder, almost unheard of for a green. She had claimed a sitter had no need for one. Different reasons came to mind now. "She is bloody being flogged by bloody Trollocs," Doacine said hoarsely. Touches of her native Kyrian had appeared in her voice, something that seldom happened except under stress. "When they are done, she can see the Trollocs' cook kettle boiling over a fire, and a Murdral watching her. She must know it will be one or the other next. Burn me, if she doesn't break this time." Doacine brushed perspiration from her forehead irritably and drew a ragged breath. "Stop juggling my elbow. It has been a long while since I did this." "3 times under," Yukiri muttered. "The toughest strong arm is broken by his own guilt, if nothing else, after 2. What if she's innocent? Light, this is like stealing sheep with the shepherd watching." Even shaking, she managed to appear regal, but she always sounded like what she had been, a village woman. She glared around at the rest of them in a sickly fashion. "The law forbids using the chair on initiates. We'll all be unchaired. And if being thrown out of the hall isn't enough, we'll probably be exiled. And burnt before we go, just to drop salt in our tea. Burn me. If we're wrong, it could all be stilled." Siain shuddered. They would escape that last if their suspicions proved right. No, not suspicions. Certainties. They had to be right. But even if they were, Yukiri was correct about the rest. Tower law seldom allowed for necessity, or any supposed higher good. If they were right, though, the price was worth paying. Please, the light send they were right. "Are you blind and deaf?" Pivara snapped, shaking the oath rod at Yukiri. She refused to re-swear the oath against speaking an untrue word, and it had to be more than stupid green Aja pride after we'd all done as much already. When I shielded her, she tried to stab me. Does that shout innocence? Does it? For all she knew, we just meant to talk at her until our tongues dried up. What reason would she have to expect more? "Thank you both," Saren put in dryly, "for stating the obvious. It's too late to go back, Yukiri, so we might as well go forward. And if I were you, Pivara, I wouldn't be shouting at one of the 4 women in the whole tower I knew I could trust." Yukiri flushed and shifted her shawl, and Pivara looked a trifle abashed. A trifle. They might all be sitters, but Saren had most definitely taken charge. Siain was unsure how she felt about that. A few hours ago, she and Pivara had been 2 old friends, alone on a dangerous quest, equals reaching decisions together. Now they had allies. She should be grateful for more companions. They were not in the hall, though, and they could not claim sitters' rights on this. Tower hierarchies had taken over, all the subtle and not-so-subtle distinctions as to who stood where with respect to whom. In truth, Saren had been both novice and accepted twice as long as most of them, but 40 years as a sitter, longer than anyone else in the hall, counted for a great deal. Siain would be lucky if Saren asked her opinion, much less her advice, before deciding anything at all. Foolish, yet the knowledge pricked like a thorn in her foot. "The Trollocs are dragging her toward the kettle," Doacine said suddenly, her voice grating. A thin keening escaped through Talene's clenched teeth. She shook so hard she seemed to vibrate. I do not know if I can flaming make myself—" "Bring her awake," Saren commanded, without so much as glancing at anyone else to see what they thought. "Stop sulking, Yukiri, and be ready." The grey gave her a proud, furious stare, but when Doacine let her weaves fade and Taline's blue eyes fluttered open, the glow of Saidar surrounded Yukiri, and she shielded the woman lying on the chair without uttering a word. Saerin was in charge, and everyone knew it, and that was that. A very sharp thorn. A shield hardly seemed necessary. Her face a mask of terror, Taline trembled and panted as though she had run 10 miles at top speed. She still sank into the soft surface, but without Doacine channeling, it no longer formed itself to her. Taline stared at the ceiling with bulging eyes, then squeezed them shut, but they popped right open again. Whatever memories lay behind her eyelids were nothing she wanted to face. Covering the 2 strides to the chair, Pevara thrust the oath rod at the distraught woman. "Forswear all oaths that bind you and retake the 3 oaths, Taline," she said harshly. Taline recoiled from the rod as from a poisonous serpent, then jerked the other way as Saerin bent over her. "Next time, Taline, it's the cookpot for you, or the Murdral's tender attentions." Saerin's face was implacable, but her tone made it seem soft by comparison. "No waking up before. And if that doesn't do, there'll be another time and another, as many as it takes if we must stay down here until summer." Doacine opened her mouth in protest before giving over with a grimace. Only she among them knew how to operate the chair, but in this group she stood as low as Siain. Taline continued to stare up at Saerin. Tears filled her big eyes, and she began to weep, great shuddering, hopeless sobs. Blindly she reached out, groping until Pevara stuck the oath rod into her hand. Embracing the source, Pevara channeled a thread of spirit to the rod. Taline gripped the wrist-thick rod so hard that her knuckles turned white, yet she just lay there sobbing. Saerin straightened. "I fear it's time to put her back to sleep, Doacine." Taline's tears redoubled, but she mumbled through them. "I forswear all oaths that bind me." With the last word, she began to howl. Siain jumped, then swallowed hard. She personally knew the pain of removing a single oath, and had speculated on the agony of removing more than one at once, but now the reality was in front of her. Taline screamed till there was no breath left in her, then pulled in air only to scream again, until Siain half expected people to come running down from the tower itself. The tall green convulsed, flinging her arms and legs about, then suddenly arched up, till only her heels and head touched the gray surface, every muscle clenched, her whole body spasming wildly. As abruptly as the seizure had begun, Taline collapsed bonelessly and lay there weeping like a lost child. The oath rod rolled from her limp hand down the sloping gray surface. Yukiri murmured something with the sound of a fervent prayer. Doacine kept whispering, "Light," over and over in a shaken voice. "Light, light." Pevara scooped up the rod and closed Taline's fingers around it again. There was no mercy in Siain's friend, not in this matter. "Now swear the 3 oaths," she spat. For an instant it seemed Taline might refuse, but slowly she repeated the oaths that made them all Aes Sedai and held them together. To speak no word that was not true. Never to make a weapon for one man to kill another. Never to use the one power as a weapon, except in defense of her life, or that of her warder or another sister. At the end she began weeping in silence, shaking without a sound. Perhaps it was the oaths tightening down on her. They were uncomfortable when fresh. Perhaps. Then Pevara told the other oath they required of her. Taline flinched, but muttered the words in tones of hopelessness. "I vow to obey all 5 of you absolutely." Otherwise she only stared straight ahead dully, tears trailing down her cheeks. "Answer me truthfully," Saerin told her. "Are you of the Black Aja?" "I am." The words creaked, as if Taline's throat were rusty. The simple words froze Siain in a way she had never expected. She had set out to hunt the Black Aja, after all, and believed in her quarry as many sisters did not. She had laid hands on another sister, on a sitter, had helped bundle Taline along deserted basement hallways wrapped in flows of air, had broken a dozen tower laws, committed serious crimes, all to hear an answer she had been nearly certain of before the question was asked. Now she had heard. The Black Aja really did exist. She was staring at a black sister, a dark friend who wore the shawl, and believing turned out to be a pale shadow of confronting. Only her jaw, clenched near to cramping, kept her teeth from chattering. She struggled to compose herself, to think rationally, but nightmares were awake and walking the tower. Someone exhaled heavily, and Siain realized she was not the only one who found her world turned upside down. Yukiri gave herself a shake, then fixed her eyes on Talene as though determined to hold the shield on her by willpower if need be. Doacine was licking her lips and smoothing her dark golden skirts uncertainly. Only Saerin and Kavara appeared at ease. "So," Saerin said softly. Perhaps faintly was a better word. "So, Black Aja." She drew a deep breath and her tone became brisk. "There's no more need for that, Yukiri. Talene, you won't try to escape or resist in any way. You won't so much as touch the source without permission from one of us. Though I suppose someone else will take this forward once we hand you over. Yukiri?" The shield on Talene dissipated, but the glow remained around Yukiri, as if she did not trust the effect of the rod on a black sister. Kavara frowned. "Before we give her to Elida, Saerin, I want to dig out as much as we can. Names, places, anything. Everything she knows." Dark Friends had killed Pivara's entire family, and Siain was sure she would go into exile ready to hunt down every last black sister personally. Still huddled on the chair, Talene made a sound half-bitter laugh, half-weeping. "When you do that, we are all dead. Dead! Elida is Black Aja." "That's impossible," Siain burst out. "Elida gave me the order herself." "She must be," Doacine half-whispered. "Talene's sworn the oaths again. She just named her." Yukiri nodded vehemently. "Use your heads," Kavara growled, shaking her own in disgust. "You know as well as I do if you believe a lie, you can say it for truth." "And that is truth," Saerin said firmly. "What proof do you have, Talene? Have you seen Elida at your meetings?" She gripped her knife hilt so hard that her knuckles paled. Saerin had had to fight harder than most for the shawl, for the right to remain in the tower at all. To her, the tower was more than home, more important than her own life. If Talene gave the wrong answer, Elida might not live to face trial. "They don't have meetings," Talene muttered sullenly. "Except the Supreme Council, I suppose. But she must be. They know every report she receives, even the secret ones, every word spoken to her. They know every decision she makes before it's announced. Days before, sometimes weeks. How else unless she tells them?" Sitting up with an effort, she tried to fix them each in turn with an intense stare. It only made her eyes seem to dart anxiously. "We have to run. We have to find a place to hide. I'll help you, tell you everything I know, but they'll kill us unless we run." Strange, Siain thought, how quickly Talene had made her former cronies they, and tried to identify herself with the rest of them. No, she was avoiding the real problem, and avoidance was witless. Had Elida really set her to dig out the Black Aja? She had never once actually mentioned the name. Could she have meant something else? Elida had always jumped down the throat of anyone who even mentioned the Black. Nearly any sister would do the same, yet... "Elida's proven herself a fool," Saerin said, "and more than once I've regretted standing for her, but I'll not believe she's black. Not without more than that." Tight-lipped, Pivara jerked an agreeing nod. As a red, she would want much more. "That's as may be, Saerin," Yukiri said, "but we cannot hold Talene long before the Greens start asking where she is. Not to mention the Black. We'd better decide what to do fast, or we'll still be digging at the bottom of the well when the rains hit." Talene gave Saerin a feeble smile that was probably meant to be ingratiating. It faded under the brown sitter's frown. "We don't dare tell Elida anything until we can cripple the Black at one blow," Saerin said finally. "Don't argue, Pivara, it's sense." Pivara threw up her hands and put on a stubborn expression, but she closed her mouth. "If Talene is right," Saerin went on, "the Black knows about Siain, or soon will, so we must ensure her safety as much as we can. That won't be easy with only the 5 of us. We can't trust anyone until we are certain of them. At least we have Talene, and who knows what we'll learn before she's wrung out." Talene attempted to look willing to be wrung out, but no one was paying her any mind. Siane's throat had gone dry. "We might not be entirely alone," Kavara said reluctantly. "Siane, tell them your little scheme with Zara and her friends." "Scheme?" Saerin said. "Who's Zara?" "Siane? Siane!" Siane gave a start. "What? Oh, Kavara and I uncovered a small nest of rebels here in the tower," she began breathily. 10 sisters sent to spread dissent. Saerin was going to make sure she was safe, was she? Without so much as asking. She was a sitter herself. She had been Aes Sedai for almost 150 years. What right had Saerin or anyone to... "Kavara and I have begun putting an end to that. We've already made one of them, Zara Dakan, take the same extra oath Talene did, and told her to bring Bernila Gelbarn to my rooms this afternoon without rousing her suspicions. Light. Any sister outside this room might be black. Any sister. Then we will use those two to bring another until they have all been made to swear obedience. Of course, we'll ask the same question we put to Zara, the same we put to Talene. The Black Aja might already have her name, already know she had been set hunting them. How could Saerin keep her safe? Those who give the wrong answer can be questioned, and those who give the right can repay for a little of their treachery by hunting the Black under our direction. Light. How? When she was done, the others discussed the matter at some length, which could only mean that Saerin was unsure what decision she would make. Yukiri insisted on giving Zara and her confederates over to the law immediately, if it could be done without exposing their own situation with Talene. Kavara argued for using the rebels, though half-heartedly. The dissent they had been spreading centered around vile tales concerning the Red Aja and false dragons. Doacine seemed to be suggesting that they kidnap every sister in the tower and force them all to take the added oath, but the other 3 paid little attention to her. Siane took no part in the discussion. Her reaction to their predicament was the only possible one, she thought. Tottering to the nearest corner, she vomited noisily. Elaine tried not to grind her teeth. Outside, another blizzard pelted Camelin, darkening the midday sky enough that the lamps along the sitting room's paneled walls were all lit. Fierce gusts rattled the casements set into the tall, arched windows. Flashes of lightning lit the clear glass panes, and thunder boomed hollowly overhead. Thunder snow, the worst kind of winter storm, the most violent. The room was not precisely cold, but... Spreading her fingers in front of the logs crackling in the broad marble fireplace, she could still feel a chill rising through the carpets layered over the floor tiles, and through her thickest velvet slippers, too. The wide black fox collar and cuffs on her red and white gown were pretty, but she was not sure they added any more of its warmth than the pearls on the sleeves. Refusing to let the cold touch her did not mean she was unaware. Where was Nynaeve? And Vandene? Her thoughts snarled like the weather. They should be here already. Light. I wish I could learn to go without sleep, and they'd take their sweet time. No, that was unfair. Her formal claim for the Lion Throne was only a few days old, and for her, everything else had to take second place for the time being. Nynaeve and Vandene had other priorities, other responsibilities as they saw them. Nynaeve was up to her neck planning with Rihanna and the rest of the knitting circle how to spirit kinswomen out of Shan-Chan-controlled lands before they were discovered and collared. The kin were very good at staying low, but the Shan-Chan would not just pass them by for wilders the way Aes Sedai always had. Supposedly, Vandene was still shaken by her sister's murder, barely eating and hardly able to give advice of any sort. The barely eating part was true, but finding the killer consumed her. Supposedly walking the halls in grief at odd hours, she was secretly hunting the dark friend among them. 3 days earlier, just the thought of that could make Elaine shiver. Now it was one danger among many. More intimate than most, true, but only most. They were doing important tasks, approved and encouraged by Egwene, but she still wished they would hurry, selfish though it might be. Vandene had a wealth of good advice, the advantage of long experience and study, and Nynaeve's years dealing with the village council and the women's circle back in Emmons Field gave her a keen eye for practical politics, however much she denied it. Burn me, I have 100 problems, some right here in the palace, and I need them. If she had her way, Nynaeve Almira was going to be the Aes Sedai advisor to the next Queen of Andor. She needed all the help she could find, help she could trust. Smoothing her face, she turned away from the blazing hearth. 13 tall armchairs, carved simply but with a fine hand, made a horseshoe arc in front of the fireplace. Paradoxically, the place of honor, where the Queen would sit if receiving here, stood farthest from the fire's heat, such as it was. Her back began to warm immediately and her front to cool. Outside, snow fell, thunder crashed, and lightning flared. Inside her head, too. Calm. A ruler had as much need of calm as any Aes Sedai. "It must be the mercenaries," she said, not quite managing to keep regret out of her voice. Armsmen from her estates surely would begin arriving inside a month, once they learned she was alive, but it might be spring before any significant numbers came, and the men Birgitte was recruiting would require half a year or more before they were fit to ride and handle a sword at the same time. And hunters for the horn, if any will sign and swear. There were plenty of both trapped in Camelin by the weather. Too many of both, most people said, carousing, brawling, troubling women who wanted no part of their attentions. At least she would be putting them to good use, to stop trouble instead of beginning it. She wished she did not think she was still trying to convince herself of that. Expensive, but the coffers will cover it. For a little while they would. She had better start receiving revenues from her estate soon. Wonder of wonders, the two women standing before her reacted in much the same fashion. Dialin gave an irritated grunt. A large round silver pin worked with Taravin's owl and oak was fastened at the high neck of her dark green dress, her only jewelry. A show of pride in her house, perhaps too much pride. The high seat of House Taravin was a proud woman altogether. Gray streaked her golden hair, and fine lines webbed the corners of her eyes, yet her face was strong, her gaze level and sharp. Her mind was a razor, or maybe a sword. A plain-spoken woman, or so it seemed, who did not hide her opinions. "Mercenaries know the work," she said dismissively, "but they are hard to control, Elaine. When you need a feather touch, they're liable to be a hammer, and when you need a hammer, they're liable to be elsewhere and stealing to boot. They are loyal to gold, and only as long as the gold lasts, if they don't betray for more gold first. I'm sure this once Lady Birgitte will agree with me." Arms folded tightly beneath her breasts and heeled boots planted wide, Birgitte grimaced, as always when anyone used her new title. Elaine had granted her an estate as soon as they reached Camelin, where it could be registered. In private, Birgitte grumbled incessantly over that, and the other change in her life. Her sky-blue trousers were cut the same as those she usually wore, billowing and gathered at the ankles, but her short red coat had a high white collar and wide white cuffs banded with gold. She was the Lady Birgitte Trahelian and the Captain General of the Queen's Guards, and she could mutter and whine all she wanted, so long as she kept it private. "I do," she growled unwillingly, and gave Dialin a not-quite sidelong glare. The warder bond carried what Elaine had been sensing all morning: frustration, irritation, determination. Some of that might have been a reflection of herself, though. They mirrored one another in surprising ways since the bonding, emotionally and otherwise. Why, her courses had shifted by more than a week to match the other woman's. Brigitte's reluctance to take the second-best argument was clearly almost as great as her reluctance to agree. "Hunters aren't much bloody better, Elaine," she muttered. "They took the hunter's oath to find adventure, and a place in the histories if they can, not to settle down keeping the law. Half are supercilious prigs looking down their flaming noses at everyone else. The rest don't just take necessary chances, they look for chances to take. And one whisper of a rumor of the Horn of Valir, and you'll be lucky if only 2 in 3 vanish overnight." Dialin smiled a thin smile as though she had won a point. Oil and water were not in it compared to those two. Each managed well enough with nearly anyone else, but for some reason they could argue over the color of charcoal. Could and would. Besides, hunters and mercenaries alike, nearly all are foreigners. That will sit poorly with high and low alike. Very poorly. The last thing you want is to start a rebellion. Lightning flared, briefly lighting the casements, and a particularly loud peal of thunder punctuated her words. In 1,000 years, 7 queens of Andor had been toppled by open rebellion, and the 2 who survived probably wished they had not. Elaine stifled a sigh. One of the small inlaid tables along the walls held a heavy silver ropework tray with cups and a tall pitcher of hot spiced wine. Lukewarm spiced wine now. She channeled briefly. Fire and a thin wisp of steam rose from the pitcher. Reheating gave the spices a slight bitterness, but the warmth of the worked silver cup in her hands was worth it. With an effort, she resisted the desire to heat the air in the room with the power and released the source. The warmth would not have lasted unless she maintained the weaves anyway. She had conquered her unwillingness to let go every time she took in Saidar, well, to some extent. Yet, of late, the desire to draw more grew every time. Every sister had to face that dangerous desire. A gesture brought the others to pour their own wine. "You know the situation," she told them. "Only a fool could think it anything but dire, and you're neither of you fools." The guards were a shell, a handful of acceptable men and a double handful of strong arms and toughs better suited to throwing drunks out of taverns or being thrown out themselves. And with the Saldeans gone and the Aiel leaving, crime was blooming like weeds in spring. She would have thought the snow would damp it down, but every day brought robbery, arson, and worse. Every day the situation grew worse. "At this rate, we'll see riots in a few weeks, maybe sooner. If I can't keep order in Caemlyn itself, the people will turn against me." If she could not keep order in the capital, she might as well announce to the world that she was unfit to rule. "I don't like it, but it has to be done, so it will be." Both opened their mouths, ready to argue further, but she gave them no chance. She made her voice firm. "It will be done." Brigitta's waist-long golden braid swung as she shook her head, yet grudging acceptance filtered through the bond. She took a decidedly odd view of their relationship as Aes Sedai and warder, but she had learned to recognize when Elaine would not be pressed. After a fashion, she had learned. There was the estate, and title, and commanding the guards, and a few other small matters. Dialin bent her neck a fraction, and perhaps her knees. It might have been a curtsy, yet her face was stone. It was well to remember that many who did not want Elaine Trakand on the Lion Throne wanted Dialin Taravin instead.
Good to see you.
The woman had been nothing but helpful, but it was early days yet, and sometimes a niggling voice whispered in the back of Elaine's head. Was Dialin simply waiting for her to bungle badly before stepping in to save Andor? Someone sufficiently prudent, sufficiently devious might try that route, and might even succeed. Elaine raised a hand to rub her temple, but made it into adjusting her hair. So much suspicion, so little trust. The game of houses had infected Andor since she left for Tar Valon. She was grateful for her months among Aes Sedai for more than learning the power. Desdemar was breath and bread to most sisters. Grateful for Tom's teaching, too. Without both, she might not have survived her return as long as she had. The light sent Tom was safe, that he and Matt and the others had escaped the Shan Chan and were on their way to Caemlyn. Every day since leaving Ebu Dar, she prayed for their safety, but that brief prayer was all she had time for now. Taking the chair at the center of the ark, the queen's chair, she tried to look like a queen, back straight, her free hand resting lightly on the carved chair arm. Looking a queen is not enough, her mother had told her often. But a fine mind, a keen grasp of affairs, and a brave heart will go for nothing if people do not see you as a queen. Brigitta was watching her closely, almost suspiciously. Sometimes the bond was decidedly inconvenient. Dialin raised her wine cup to her lips. Elaine took a deep breath. She had harried this question from every direction she knew, and she could see no other way. Brigitta, by spring, I want the guards to be an army equal to anything 10 houses can put in the field. Impossible to achieve, likely, but just trying meant keeping the mercenaries who signed now and finding more, signing every man who showed the least inclination. Light, what a foul tangle. Dial-in choked, her eyes bulging. Dark wine sprayed from her mouth. Still spluttering, she plucked a lace-edged handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed at her chin. A wave of panic shot down the bond from Brigitte. Oh, burn me, Elaine. You can't mean... I'm an archer, not a general. That's all I've ever been. Don't you understand yet? I just did what I had to do, what circumstances forced on me. Anyway, I'm not her anymore. I'm just me, and... She trailed off, realizing she might have said too much. Not for the first time. Her face went crimson as Dial-in eyed her curiously. They had put it about that Brigitte was from Candor, where country women wore something like her clothes, yet Dial-in clearly suspected the lie. And every time Brigitte let her tongue slip, she came closer to letting her secret slip, too. Elaine shot her a look that promised a talking to later. She would not have thought Brigitte's cheeks could get any redder. Mortification drowned everything else in the bond, flooding through until Elaine felt her own face coloring. Quickly, she put on a stern expression, hoping her crimson cheeks would pass for something other than an intense desire to squirm in her seat with Brigitte's humiliation. That mirroring effect could be more than merely inconvenient. Dial-in wasted only a moment on Brigitte. Tucking her handkerchief back in its place, she carefully set her cup back on the tray, then planted her hands on her hips. Her face was a thunderhead now. The guards have always been the core of Andor's army, Elaine, but this... Light's mercy, this is madness. You could turn every hand against you from the river Aranin to the mountains of mist. Elaine focused on calm. If she was wrong, Andor would become another Kyrian, another blood-soaked land filled with chaos. And she would die, of course, a price not high enough to meet the cost. Not trying was unthinkable, and in any case would have the same result for Andor as failure. Cool, composed, steely calm. A queen could not show herself afraid, even when she was, especially when she was. Her mother had always said to explain decisions as seldom as possible. The more often you explained, the more explanations were necessary, until they were all you had time for. Gareth Bryn said to explain if you could. Your people did better if they knew the why as well as the what. Today she would follow Gareth Bryn. A good many victories had been won by following him. I have 3 declared challengers, and maybe 1 not declared. She made herself meet Dial-in's gaze. Not angrily, just eyes meeting eyes. Or maybe Dial-in did take it for anger, with her jaw tight and her face flushed. If so, so be it. By herself, Aramilla is negligible, but Nason has joined House Cairn to her, and whether or not he's sane, his support means she must be considered. Nayan and Elenia are imprisoned. Their armsmen are not. Nayan's people may dither and argue until they find a leader, but Jared is high seat of Sarand, and he will take chances to feed his wife's ambition. House Barin and House Anshar flirt with both. The best I can hope is that one goes with Sarand and one with Aron. 19 houses in Andor are strong enough that smaller houses will follow where they lead. 6 are arrayed against me, and I have 2. 6 so far, and the light sense she had 2. She would not mention the 3 great houses that had all but declared for Dial-in. At least Egwene had them tied down in Murandy for now. She motioned to a chair near her, and Dial-in sat, carefully arranging her skirts. The storm clouds had left the older woman's face. She studied Elaine, giving no hint as to her questions or conclusions. I know all that as well as you, Elaine, but Luan and Elorian will bring their houses to you, and Abella will as well, I'm sure. A careful voice, too, but it gathered heat as she went on. Other houses will see reason then, as long as you don't frighten them out of reason. Light, Elaine, this is not a succession. Trakand succeeds Trakand, not another house. Even a succession has seldom come to open fighting. Make the guards into an army and you risk everything. Elaine threw her head back, but her laughter held no amusement. It fit right in with the peals of thunder. I risked everything the day I came home, Dylan. You say Norwellen and Tremaine will come to me, and Pendar? Fine. Then I have 5 to face 6. I don't think the other houses will see reason, as you put it. If any of them move before it's clear as good glass the Rose Crown is mine, it will be against me, not for. With luck, those lords and ladies would shy away from associating with cronies of Gabriel, but she did not like depending on luck. She was not Matt Cawthon. Light. Most people were sure Rand had killed her mother, and few believed that Lord Gabriel had been one of the Forsaken. Mending the damage Ravine had done in Andor might take her entire lifetime, even if she managed to live as long as the kinswomen. Some houses would stand aside from supporting her because of the outrages Gabriel had perpetrated in Morghase's name, and others because Rand had said he intended to give her the throne. She loved the man to her toes, but burn him for giving voice to that. Even if it was what reigned in Dylan, the meanest crofter in Andor would shoulder his scythe to pull a puppet from the Lion Throne. I want to avoid Andoran killing Andoran if I can, Dylan, but succession or no succession, Jared is ready to fight, even with Elenia locked away. Nayan is ready to fight. Best to bring both women to Caemlyn as soon as possible. Too much chance of them slipping messages and orders out of Arengil. Aramilla is ready, with Nason's men behind her. To them, this is a succession, and the only way to stop them from fighting is to be so strong they don't dare. If Brigitte can build the guards into an army by spring, well and good, because if I don't have an army before then, I will have need of one. And if that isn't enough, remember the Shanchan. They won't be satisfied with Tanchico and Ebu Dar. They want everything. I won't let them have Andor, Dylan, any more than I'll let Aramilla. Thunder roared overhead. Twisting a little to look back at Brigitte, Dylan moistened her lips. Her fingers plucked unconsciously at her skirts. Very little frightened her, but tales of the Shanchan had. What she murmured, though, as if to herself, was, I had hoped to avoid outright civil war. And that might mean nothing, or a great deal. Perhaps a little probing might show which. Gawain, Brigitte said suddenly. Her expression had lightened, and so had the emotions flowing through the bond. Relief stood out strong. When he comes, he'll take command. He'll be your first prince of the sword. Mother's milk in a cup, Elaine snapped, and lightning flared in the windows for emphasis. Why did the woman have to change the subject now? Dylan gave a start, and heat flooded back into Elaine's face. By the older woman's gaping mouth, she knew exactly how coarse that curse was. Strangely embarrassing, that. It should not have counted for anything that Dylan had been her mother's friend. Unthinking, she took a deep swallow of wine, and nearly gagged at the bitterness. Quickly, she suppressed images of Lini threatening to wash out her mouth, and reminded herself that she was a grown woman with a throne to win. She doubted her mother had ever found herself feeling foolish so often. Yes, he will, Brigitte, she went on more calmly, when he comes. 3 couriers were on their way to Tarvawan. Even if none managed to get past Elida, Gawain would learn eventually that she had made her claim, and he would come. She needed him desperately. She had no illusions of herself as a general, and Brigitte was so fearful she could not live up to the legends about her that sometimes she seemed afraid to try. Face an army, yes. Lead an army, never under the sun. Brigitte was well aware of the tangle in her own mind. Right that moment her face was frozen, but her emotions were full of self-anger and embarrassment, with the first growing stronger by the moment. With a stab of irritation, Elaine opened her mouth to pursue Dylan's mention of civil war before she began reflecting Brigitte's anger. Before she could utter a word, though, the tall red doors opened. Her hopes for Nynaeve or Vandene were dashed by the entrance of 2 seafolk women, barefoot despite the weather. A cloud of musky perfume wafted ahead of them, and by themselves they made up a procession in bright brocaded silk trousers and blouses, jeweled daggers and necklaces of gold and ivory, and other jewelry. Straight black hair with white at the temples nearly hid the 10 small, fat golden rings in Renila Din Kalan's ears, but the arrogance in her dark eyes was as plain as the medallion-laden golden chain that connected one earring to her nose ring. Her face was set, and despite a graceful sway to her walk, she appeared ready to stride through a wall. Nearly a hand shorter than her companion and darker than charcoal, Zaida din Parida wore half again as many golden medallions dangling on her left cheek, and carried an air of command, rather than arrogance, a sure certainty that she would be obeyed. Gray flecked her cap of tight black curls, yet she was stunning, one of those women who grew more and more beautiful as they aged. Dialin flinched at sight of them, and half raised a hand to her nose before she could stop herself, a common enough reaction in people unused to the Atha an Mier. Elaine grimaced, and not for their nose rings. She even considered another curse, something still more pungent. Excepting the Forsaken, she could not have named two people she wanted less to see right then. Rena was supposed to see this did not happen. "Forgive me," she said, rising smoothly, "but I am very busy now. Matters of state, you understand, or I would greet you as your stations deserve." The sea folk were sticklers for ceremony and propriety, at least on their own terms. Very likely they had gotten past the first maid by simply not telling her they wanted to see Elaine, but they easily might take offense if she greeted them sitting before the crown was hers. And the light burned both of them. She could not afford to offend. Birgitta appeared at her side, bowing formally to take her cup. The warder bond carried wariness. She was always ginger around the sea folk. She had let her tongue slip around them, too. "I will see you later in the day," Elaine finished, adding, "the light willing." They also were great ones for ceremonial turns of phrase, and that one showed courtesy and gave a way out. Renila did not stop until she stood right in front of Elaine and much too close. One tattooed hand gestured curt permission for her to sit. Permission? "You have been avoiding me." Her voice was deep for a woman, and as chill as the snow falling on the roof. "Remember that I am Windfinder to Nesta din Rias Moons, mistress of the ships to the Atha an Mier. You still must fulfill the rest of the bargain you made for your White Tower." The sea folk knew of the division in the tower. By this time everyone and her sister knew, but Elaine had not seen fit to add to her difficulties by making public which side she was on. Not yet. Renila finished on an imperious, commanding note. "You will deal with me, and now." So much for ceremony and propriety. "She has been avoiding me, I think, not you, Windfinder." In contrast to Renila, Zaida sounded as though she were merely making conversation. Rather than rushing across the carpets, she moved idly about the room, pausing to touch a tall vase of thin green porcelain, then rising on her toes to peer through a four-barreled kaleidoscope atop a tall stand. When she glanced toward Elaine and Renila, an amused glint twinkled in her black eyes. After all, the bargain was with Nesta din Rias, speaking for the ships. In addition to wave mistress of Clan Catalar, Zaida was an ambassador from the mistress of the ships. To Rand, not Andor, but her warrant gave the authority to speak and bind for Nesta herself. Changing one gold-chased barrel for another, she went on tiptoe to look through the eyepiece again. "You promised the Atha an Mier 20 teachers, Elaine. So far you have delivered one." Their entrance had been so sudden, so dramatic, that Elaine was surprised to see Marililla turn from closing the doors. Shorter still than Zaida, the Grey sister was elegant in dark blue wool trimmed with silvery fur and sewn with small moonstones across the bodice, yet barely more than 2 weeks teaching the Windfinders had brought changes. Most were powerful women with a thirst for knowledge, more than ready to squeeze Marililla like a grape in the wine-press, demanding the last drop of juice. Once Elaine had thought her self-possessed beyond the ability to surprise, but now Marililla was constantly wide-eyed, her lips always a little parted, as though she had just been startled half out of her wits, and expected to be startled again any moment. Folding her hands at the waist, she waited by the doorway, and appeared relieved to be out of the center of attention. Harumphing loudly, Dialin got to her feet and scowled at Zaida and Renila both. "Have a care how you speak," she growled. "You are in Andor now, not on one of your ships, and Elaine Trakand will be Queen of Andor. Your bargain will be met in good time. For now, we have more important matters to contend with." "Under the light, there are none more important," Renila rumbled in turn, rounding on her. "You say the bargain will be met, so you stand surety. Know there will be room to dangle you by your ankles in the rigging as well if—" Zaida snapped her fingers. That was all, but a tremor passed through Renila. Snatching the golden scent box dangling from one of her necklaces, she pressed it to her nose and breathed deeply. Windfinder to the mistress of the ships she might be, a woman of great authority and power among the Ata-an-Mier, but to Zaida she was a windfinder, which grated her pride excessively. Elaine was sure there must be a way to use that to keep them out of her hair, but she had not found it yet. Oh yes, for good or ill, Desdemar was in her bones now. She glided around a silently furious Renila as if around the column, a part of the room, though not toward Zaida. If anyone had a right to be casual here, she did. She could not afford to give Zaida a hair of advantage, or the wave mistress would shave her scalp for the wig makers. At the fireplace, she spread her hands in front of the flames again. "Nesta Din Rias trusted we would fulfill the bargain, or she never would have agreed to it," she said calmly. "You have regained the Bowl of the Winds, but assembling 19 more sisters to join you requires time. I know you worry about the ships that were at Ebu Dar when the Shan-Chan came. Have Renila make a gateway to Tyr. There are hundreds of Ata-an-Mier vessels there. Every report said so. You can learn what they know and rejoin your people. They will have need of you against the Shan-Chan, and she would be rid of them. The other sisters will be sent to you as soon as can be arranged." Marililla did not move from the doorway, but her face took on a green tinge of panic at the possibility of being alone among the sea folk. Zaida gave over looking through the kaleidoscope and eyed Elaine sideways. A smile quirked her very full lips. "I must remain here, at least until I speak with Randall Thor. If he ever comes." That smile tightened for an instant before blooming once more. Rand would have a hard time with her. "And I will keep Renila and her companions for the time. A handful of windfinders more or less will make no great difference against these Shan-Chan, and here, the light willing, they may learn what will be useful." Renila snorted, just loudly enough to be heard. Zaida frowned briefly and began fiddling with the eyepiece that stood level with the top of her head. "There are 5 Aes Sedai here in your palace, counting yourself," she murmured thoughtfully. "Perhaps some of you might teach," as though the idea had just occurred to her. And if that were so, Elaine could lift both seafolk women with one hand. "Oh yes, that would be wonderful," Marililla burst out, taking a step forward. Then she glanced at Renila and subsided, a blush suffusing her Kyrianan paleness. Folding her hands at her waist once more, she snatched meekness around herself like a second skin. Birgitta shook her head in amazement. Dialin stared as if she had never seen the Aes Sedai before. "Something may be worked out, if the light pleases," Elaine said cautiously. Not rubbing at her temples took effort. She wished she could blame the ache inside her skull on the incessant thunder. Nynaeve would erupt at the suggestion, and Vandene likely would ignore any such order, but Cariana and Saritha might be possible. For no more than a few hours a day, you understand, when they have time. She avoided looking at Marililla. Even Cariana and Saritha might rebel at being tossed into that wine press. Zaida touched the fingers of her right hand to her lips. "It is agreed, under the light." Elaine blinked. That was ominous. In the wave mistress's eyes, apparently, they had just made another bargain. Her limited experience of dealing with the Ata-an-Mier was that you were lucky to walk away with your shift. Well, this time things were going to be different. For instance, what were the sisters to gain in it? There had to be 2 sides to a bargain. Zaida smiled as if she knew what Elaine was thinking and was amused. One of the doors opening again was almost a relief, giving her an excuse to turn away from the seafolk woman. Rena Harfor slipped into the room with deference but without servility, and her curtsy was restrained, suitable for the high seat of a powerful house to her queen. But then, Any high seat worth a pinch of salt knew enough to offer respect to the first maid. Her graying hair was arranged in a bun, like a crown atop her head, and she wore a scarlet tabard over her red and white dress, with the white line of Andor's head resting on her formidable bosom. Rena had no say in who would sit on the throne, but she had adopted full formal dress on the day of Elaine's arrival, as if the queen already were in residence. Her round face hardened momentarily at sight of the Atha'an Mier women who had bypassed her, but that was all the notice she gave them. For now, they would learn to their cost what incurring the animosity of the first maid entailed. "Masrim time has come at last, my lady." Rena managed to make that sound very like "my queen." "Shall I tell him to wait?" "Not before time," Elaine muttered in her head. She had summoned the man 2 days ago. "Yes, Mistress Harfor, give him wine, the third best, I think. Inform him that I will see him as soon as I—" Taim strode into the room as though he owned the palace. She did not need him named. Blue and gold dragons wove round the sleeves of his black coat from elbows to cuffs, in imitation of the dragons on Rand's arms, though she suspected he would not appreciate the observation. He was tall, nearly as tall as Rand, with a hooked nose and dark eyes like augurs, a physically powerful man who moved with something of a warder's deadly grace, but shadows seemed to follow him, as if half the lamps in the room had gone out. Not real shadows, but an air of imminent violence that seemed palpable enough to soak up light. 2 more black-coated men followed at his heels, a bald fellow with a long grizzled beard and leering blue eyes, and a younger man, snake-slim and dark-haired, with the sneering arrogance young men often adopted before they learned better. Both wore the silver sword and red enameled dragon on their tall collars. None of the 3 carried a sword on his hip, though. They did not need swords. Suddenly the sitting room felt smaller and crowded. Instinctively, Elaine embraced Sidar and reached out to Link. Marililla slipped into the circle easily. Astoundingly, so did Renila. A quick glance at the Windfinder lessened her surprise. Her face gray, Renila was gripping the dagger thrust behind her sash so hard that Elaine could feel the pain in her knuckles through the link. She had been in Camelin long enough to be aware of what an Ashaman was. The men knew someone had embraced Sidar, of course, even if they could not see the glow surrounding the 3 women. The bald man stiffened. The slim young man clenched his fists. They stared with angry eyes. Surely they had seized Saidin. Elaine began to regret giving in to reflex, but she was not going to let go of the source, not now. Taim radiated danger the way a fire gave heat. She drew deeply through the link, to the point where the overwhelming sense of life became sharp, warning prickles. Even those felt joyous. With that much of the power in her, she could lay waste to the palace, but she wondered whether it was enough to match Taim and the other 2. She very much wished she had one of the 3 Angreal they had found in Ebu Dar, now safely locked away with the rest of the things from the cache until she had time to study them again. Taim shook his head contemptuously, a half-smile flickering across his lips. "Use your eyes." His voice was quiet, but hard and sneering. "There are 2 Aes Sedai here. Are you afraid of 2 Aes Sedai? Besides, you don't want to frighten the future Queen of Andor." His companions relaxed visibly, then began trying to emulate the unthinking dominance of his stance. Rena knew nothing of Sidar or Saidin. She had rounded on the men, scowling as soon as they entered. Ashaman or no Ashaman, she expected people to behave as they should. She muttered something almost under her breath. Not quite far enough under, though. The words "sneaking rats" were just audible. The first maid reddened when she realized everyone in the room had heard, and Elaine got a chance to see Rena Harfor flustered, which was to say that the woman drew herself up and said, with a grace and dignity any ruler might envy, "Forgive me, my Lady Elaine, but I've been told there are rats infesting the storerooms. Most unusual this time of year, and so many of them. If you will excuse me, I must make sure my orders for rat catchers and poison baits are being carried out." "Stay," Elaine told her coolly, calmly. "Vermin can be dealt with in due time." 2 Aes Sedai. He did not realize Renila could channel, and he had emphasized, too. Would just 3 women give some advantage, or did it take more? Plainly, the Ashama knew of some advantage to women in numbers less than a circle of 13. Walk in on her without so much as a by your leave, would they? You can show these good men out when I'm done with them. Taim's companions scowled at being called goodman, but the man himself merely flashed another of those almost smiles. He was quick enough to know she had been thinking of him when she spoke of vermin. Light. Maybe Rand had needed this man once, but why would he keep him now, and in a position of such authority? Well, his authority counted for nothing here. Unhurriedly, she took her chair again and gave a moment to adjusting her skirts. The men would have to come around in front of her like supplicants, or else talk to the side of her head while she refused to look at them. For an instant she considered passing control of the small circle. The Ashaman would surely focus their attention on her. Renila was still gray, though, anger and fear tumbling over one another inside her. She might strike out as soon as the link was hers. Marililla had some fear, just under control, mixed with a very great deal of a goosey feeling that matched her wide eyes and parted lips. The light alone knew what she might do with the link. Dialin glided to the side of Elaine's chair as if to shield her from the Ashaman. Whatever lay inside the high seat of Taravin, her face was stern, unfrightened. The other women had wasted no time in preparing as best they could. Zaida stood very still beside the kaleidoscope, doing her best to look diminutive and harmless, but her hands were behind her back, and the dagger was missing from behind her sash. Birgitta lounged beside the fireplace, left hand propped on the jamb, seemingly at her ease, but the sheath of her belt knife was empty, and from the way her other hand rested by her side, she was ready for an underhand throw. The bond carried focus. Arrow nocked, drawn to cheek, ready to loose. Elaine made no effort to look around Dialin at the 3 men. First, you are too slow obeying my summons, Master Taim, and then too sudden. Light. Was he holding Saidin? There were methods of interfering with a man channeling, short of shielding him, but it was a difficult skill, chancy, and she knew little more than the theory. He did come in front of her, several paces off, but he did not look a supplicant. Mazrim Taim knew who he was and his own worth, though he plainly set it higher than the sky. Lightning flashing in the windows sent strange lights across his face. Many would feel overawed by him, even without his fancy coat or his infamous name. She did not. She would not. Taim rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I understand you've taken down the dragon banners all over Camelin, Mistress Elaine. There was amusement in his deep voice, if none in his eyes. Dialin hissed in fury at the slight to Elaine, but he ignored her. The Saldeans have withdrawn to the Legion of the Dragon's camp, I hear, and soon the last of the Aiel will be in camps outside the city as well. What will he say when he learns? There was no doubt who he meant. And after he's sent you a gift, too, from the south. I'll have it delivered later. I will ally Andor with the Dragon Reborn in due course, she told him coldly. But Andor is not a conquered province, not for him or anyone else. She made her hands stay relaxed on the arms of the chair. Light. Talking the Aiel and Saldeans into leaving had been her biggest achievement yet, and even with the flare-up in crime, it had been necessary. In any case, Master Taim, it is not your place to call me to task. If Rand objects, I will deal with him. Taim raised an eyebrow, and that odd quirk of his mouth lingered. Burn me, she thought indignantly. I shouldn't have used Rand's name. The man clearly thought he knew exactly how she would deal with the anger of the bloody Dragon Reborn. The worst of it was, if she could trip Rand into a bed, she would. Not for this, not to deal with him, but because she wanted to. What sort of gift had he sent her? Anger hardened her voice. Anger at Time's tone, at Rand for staying away so long, at herself for blushing and thinking of gifts. Gifts! You've walled in 4 miles of Andor. Light, that was more than half as large as the inner city. How many of these fellows could it hold? The thought made her skin crawl. With whose permission, Master Taim? Don't tell me the Dragon Reborn. He has no right to give permission for anything in Andor. Dylan shifted beside her. No right, but enough strength could make right. Elaine kept her attention on Taim. You've refused the Queen's Guard's entry to your compound. Not that they had tried before she came home. The law in Andor runs over all of Andor, Master Taim. Justice will be the same for lord or farmer or Ashaman. I won't claim I can force my way in. He began to smile again, or nearly so. I wouldn't demean myself, but unless the Queen's Guards are allowed in, I promise you not so much as a potato will go through your gates either. I know you can travel. Let your Ashaman spend their days traveling to buy food. The almost smile vanished in a faint grimace. His boots shifted slightly. Annoyance lasted only an instant, though. Food is a small problem, he said smoothly, spreading his hands. As you say, my men can travel. To anywhere I command. I doubt you could stop me buying whatever I want, even 10 miles from Camelin, but it wouldn't bother me if you could. Still, I am willing to allow visits whenever you ask. Controlled visits, with escorts at all times. The training is hard in the Black Tower. Men die almost every day. I would not want any accidents. He was irritatingly accurate on how far from Camelin her writ ran, but no more than irritating. Were his remarks about traveling anywhere he commanded and accidents meant to be veiled threats? Surely not. A wave of fury ran through her as she realized that she was certain he would not threaten her because of Rand. She would not hide behind Rand al'Thor. Controlled visits? When she asked? She ought to burn the man to a cinder where he stood. Abruptly, she became aware of what was coming through the bond from Birgitta. Anger, a reflection of hers, joining with Birgitta's, reflecting from Birgitta to her, bouncing from her to Birgitta, feeding on itself, building. Birgitta's knife hand quivered with the desire to throw. And herself? Fury filled her. A whisker more and she would lose Saidar, or lash out with it. With an effort, she forced rage down into a semblance of calm, a rough, seething semblance. She swallowed and struggled to keep her voice level. The guards will visit every day, Master Taim, and how she was to manage that in this weather she did not know. Perhaps I will come myself, with a few other sisters. If the thought of having Aes Sedai inside his black tower upset Taim, he did not show it. Light. She was trying to establish Andor's authority, not goad the man. Hurriedly, she did a novice exercise, the river contained by the bank, seeking calm. It worked, a little. Now she merely wanted to throw all the wine cups at him. I will accede to your request for escorts, but nothing is to be hidden. I won't have crimes concealed by your secrets. Do we understand one another? Taim's bow was mocking, but there was a tightness in his voice. I understand you perfectly. Understand me, though. My men are not farmers knuckling their foreheads when you pass. Press an Ashaman too hard, and you may learn just how strong your law is. Elaine opened her mouth to tell him exactly how strong the law was in Andor. It is time, Elaine Trakand, a woman's voice said from the doorway. Blood and ashes, Dylan muttered. Is the whole world just going to walk in here? Elaine recognized the new voice. She had been expecting this summons without knowing when it would come. Knowing that it must be obeyed, though, on the instant. She stood, wishing she could have a little longer to make matters clear to Taim. He frowned at the woman who had just entered, and at Elaine, clearly uncertain what to make of this. Good. Let him stew until she had time to set him straight on what special rights Ashaman had in Andor. Nadir stood as tall as either of the two men by the door, a wide woman, as close to stout as any Aiel Elaine had seen. Her green eyes examined the pair for a moment before dismissing them as unimportant. Ashaman did not impress wise ones. Very little did. Adjusting her dark shawl on her shoulders in a clatter of bracelets, she walked over in front of Elaine, her back to Taim. Despite the cold, she wore only that shawl over her thin white blouse. though oddly she carried a heavy wool cloak draped across one arm. "You must come now," she told Elaine, "without delay." Taim's eyebrows seemed to be climbing his forehead. No doubt he was unaccustomed to being so thoroughly ignored. "Light of heaven," Dailan breathed, massaging her forehead. "I don't know what this is about, Nadir, but it will have to wait until—" Elaine laid a hand on her arm. "You don't know, Dailan, and it can't wait. I will send everyone away and come with you, Nadir." The Wise One shook her head disapprovingly. "A child waiting to be born cannot take time to send people away." She shook out the thick cloak. "I brought this to shield your skin from the cold. Perhaps I should leave it and tell Avienda your modesty is greater than your desire for a sister." Dailan gasped in sudden realization. The warder bond quivered with Brigitta's outrage. There was only one choice possible. No choice, really. Letting the link to the other two women dissolve, she released Saidar herself. The glow remained around Ranila and Marililla, though. "Will you help me with my buttons, Dailan?" Elaine was proud of how steady her voice was. She had expected this, just not with so many witnesses, she thought faintly. Turning her back on Taim, at least she would not have to see him watching her, she began with the tiny buttons on her sleeves. "Dailan, if you please. Dailan?" After a moment, Dailan moved as if sleepwalking and began fumbling with the buttons down Elaine's back, muttering to herself in shocked tones. One of the Ashaman by the doors snickered. "About turn," Taim snapped, and boots stamped by the doors. Elaine did not know whether he had turned away as well. She was certain she could feel his eyes on her. But suddenly Brigitta was there, and Marililla, and Rena, and Zaida, and even Ranila, crowding shoulder to shoulder, scowling as they formed a wall between her and the men. Not a very adequate wall. None were as tall as she, and neither Zaida nor Marililla stood higher than her shoulder. "Focus," she told herself. "I am composed. I am tranquil. I'm stripping naked in a room full of people is what I am." She undressed as hurriedly as she could, letting her dress and shift fall to the floor, tossing her slippers and stockings on top of them. Her skin pebbled in the cool air. Ignoring the chill just meant she was not shivering, and she rather thought the heat in her cheeks might have something to do with that. "Madness," Dailan muttered in a low voice, snatching up the clothes. "Utter madness." "What is this about?" Brigitta whispered. "Should I come with you?" "I must go alone," Elaine whispered back. "Don't argue." Not that Brigitta gave any outward sign of it, but the bond carried volumes. Taking the golden hoops from her ears, she handed them to Brigitta, then hesitated before adding her great serpent ring. The Wise Ones had said she must come as a child came to birth. They had had a great many instructions, first among them to tell no one what was coming. For that matter, she wished she knew. A child came to birth without foreknowledge of what was to happen. Brigitta's muttering began to sound like Dailan's. Nadir came forward with the cloak, but simply held it out. Elaine had to take it and wrap it around herself hastily. She was still sure she could feel Taim's gaze. Holding the heavy wool close, her instinct was to hurry from the room, but instead she drew herself up and turned around slowly. She would not scurry out, cloaked in shame. The men who had come with Taim stood rigidly, facing the doors, and Taim himself was peering at the fireplace, arms folded across his chest. The feel of his eyes had been imagination then. Excepting Nadir, the other women looked at her in variations of curiosity, consternation, and shock. Nadir merely seemed impatient. Elaine tried for her most queenly voice. "Mistress Harfor, you will offer Master Taim and his men wine before they go?" Well, at least it did not tremble. "Dailan, please entertain the Wave Mistress and the Windfinder and see if you can allay their fears. Brigitta, I expect to hear your plan for recruiting tonight." The women she named blinked in startlement, nodded wordlessly. Then she walked from the room, followed by Nadir, wishing she could have done better. The last thing she heard before the door closed behind her was Zaida's voice. "Strange customs you shorebound have." In the corridor, she tried to move a little faster, though it was not easy while keeping the cloak from gaping. The red and white floor tiles were much colder than the carpets in the sitting room. A few servants, warmly bundled in good woolen livery, stared when they saw her, then hurried on about their tasks. The flames of the stand lamps flickered. There were always drafts in the hallways. Occasionally the air stirred enough to make a wall hanging ripple lazily. "That was on purpose, wasn't it?" she said to Nadir, not really asking a question. "Whenever you called me, you'd have made sure there were plenty of people to watch, to make sure adopting Avienda was important enough to me." It had to be more important than anything else they had been told. "What did you do to her?" Avienda seemed to have very little modesty sometimes, often walking around her apartments unclothed and unconcerned, not even noticing when servants entered. Making her undress in a crowd would have proved nothing. "That is for her to tell you if she wishes," Nadir said complacently. "You are sharp to see it. Many do not." Her large bosom heaved in a grunt that might have been a laugh. "Those men turning their backs, and those women guarding you. I would have put a stop to it if the man in the embroidered coat had not kept looking over his shoulder to admire your hips, and if your blushes had not said you knew." Elaine missed a step and stumbled. The cloak flared, losing the little body warmth it had trapped before she could snatch it closed again. "That filthy pig-kisser," she growled. I'll... Burn her? What could she do? Tell Rand? Let him deal with Taim? Never in life. Nadir eyed her quizzically. "Most men enjoy looking at a woman's bottom. Stop thinking about men and start thinking about the woman you want for a sister." Flushing again, Elaine put her mind on Avienda. It did nothing to settle her nerves. There were specific things she had been told to think on before the ceremony, and some made her uneasy. Nadir kept her pace to Elaine's, and Elaine took great care not to let her legs flash through the cloak's opening. There were servants everywhere, so it took them some little time to reach the room where the wise ones were gathered, more than a dozen of them in their bulky skirts and white blouses and dark shawls, decked with necklaces and bracelets of gold and silver, gems and ivory, their long hair held back with folded scarves. All the furnishings and carpets had been cleared out, leaving bare white floor tiles, and there was no fire on the hearth. Here, deep in the palace with no windows, the crash of thunder was barely audible. Elaine's eyes went straight to Avienda, standing on the far side of the room, naked. She smiled at Elaine nervously. Nervously? Avienda? Hurriedly throwing off the cloak, Elaine smiled back. Nervously, she realized. Avienda gave a soft laugh, and after a moment, Elaine did too. Light. The air was cold, and the floor was colder. She did not know most of the wise ones in the room, but one face jumped at her. Amis's prematurely white hair combined with features that appeared short of their middle years to give her something of the look of an Aes Sedai. She must have traveled from Cairhien. Egwene had been teaching the Dreamwalkers to repay their teaching about Tel Run-Riod, and to meet a debt, she claimed, though she had never made clear what debt. "I hoped Elaine would be here," Elaine said. She liked Bale's wife, a warm and generous woman, not like two others in the room she recognized, bony Tamela with her angular face, and Viendra, a beautiful blue-eyed eagle. Both were stronger in the power than she, stronger than any sister she had met, save Nynaeve. That was not supposed to matter among Aiel, but she could think of no other reason why they always sneered and looked down their noses when they saw her. She expected Amis to take charge. Amis always did, it seemed, but it was a short woman named Mona Ella, her hair yellow with hints of red, who stepped forward. Not truly short, yet still the only woman in the room shorter than Elaine, and the weakest in the power, too, barely strong enough, had she gone to Tar Valon, to have earned the shawl. Perhaps that really did not count with Aiel. "Were Melaine here," Mona Ella said, her tone brisk but not unfriendly, "the babes she carries would be part of the bond between you and Avienda if the weave brushed them. If they survive, that is. The unborn are not strong enough for this. The question is, are the two of you?" She gestured with both hands, pointing to spots on the floor not far from her. "Come here to the middle of the chamber, both of you." For the first time, Elaine realized that Saidar was to be part of this. She had thought it would be just a ceremony, pledges exchanged, perhaps oaths given. What was going to happen? It did not matter, except... Her steps dragged as she moved toward Monaella. My warder, our bond, will she be affected by this? Avienda, coming to face her, had frowned when Elaine hesitated, but at the question she swung startled eyes to Monaella. Clearly it was something she had not thought of. The short, wise one shook her head. No one outside this chamber can be touched by the weaves. She may sense some part of what you share with each other because of her bond with you, but only a very little. Avienda heaved a sigh of relief that Elaine echoed. Now, Monaella went on, there are forms to be followed. Come, we are not clan chiefs discussing water pledges over usquai. Laughing, making what seemed to be jokes about clan chiefs and the strong Aiel liquor, the other women formed a circle around Avienda and Elaine. Monaella settled gracefully to the floor, sitting cross-legged 2 paces to one side of the bare women. Laughter ceased as her voice became formal. We are gathered because 2 women wish to be first sisters. We will see whether they are strong enough, and if they are, help them. Are their mothers present? Elaine gave a start, but the next moment Viendra was behind her. I stand for Elaine Tracan's mother, who cannot be here. Hands on Elaine's shoulders, Viendra pushed her forward and pressed down until she was kneeling on the cold tiles in front of Avienda, then knelt behind her. I offer my daughter to her testing. Tamela appeared behind Avienda, pressing her down with her knees almost touching Elaine's, kneeling at her back. I stand for Avienda's mother who cannot be here. I offer my daughter to her testing. Another time Elaine might have giggled. Neither woman looked more than a half-dozen years older than Avienda or her. Another time. Not now. The standing wise ones wore solemn faces. They were studying her and Avienda as if weighing them, unsure they would measure up. Who will suffer the pangs of birth for them? Monaella asked, and Amis stepped forward. 2 others came with her, a fiery redhead named Shianda, whom Elaine had seen with Melaine, and a graying woman she did not know. They helped Amis strip to her skin. Proud in her nakedness, Amis faced Monaella and slapped her taut belly. I have borne children. I have given suck, she said, cupping breasts that looked as if she had done nothing of the kind. I offer myself. At Monaella's dignified nod of acceptance, Amis went to her knees 2 paces on the other side of Elaine and Avienda and settled back on her heels. Shianda and the graying wise one knelt, flanking her, and suddenly the glow of the power surrounded every woman in the room except Elaine, Avienda, and Amis. Elaine took a deep breath and saw Avienda do the same. Occasionally a bracelet clicked against another among the wise ones, the only sound in the room beyond breathing and faint, distant thunder. It was almost a shock when Monaella spoke. You will both do as you are instructed. If you waver or question, your dedication is not strong enough. I will send you away, and that will be the end of it forever. I will ask questions, and you will answer truthfully. If you refuse to answer, you will be sent away. If any here think you lie, you will be sent away. You may leave at any time on your own, of course, which also will end this for all time. There are no second chances here. Now, what is the best you know of the woman you want for a first sister? Elaine half expected the question. This was one of the things she had been told to think about. Choosing one virtue among many had not been easy, yet she had her answer ready. When she spoke, flows of Saidar suddenly wove together between her and Avienda, and no sound came from her tongue or Avienda's. Without thought, a part of her mind tucked away the weaves. Even now, trying to learn was as much a part of her as the color of her eyes. The weaves vanished as her lips closed. Avienda is so confident, so proud. She doesn't care what anyone thinks she should do or be. She is who she wants to be, Elaine heard her own voice say, while Avienda's words suddenly were audible at the same time. Even when Elaine is so afraid that her mouth dries, her spirit will not bend. She is braver than anyone I have ever known. Elaine stared at her friend. Avienda thought she was brave? Light. She was no coward, but brave? Strangely, Aviendha was staring at her in disbelief. "Courage is a well," Viendra said at Elaine's ear. "Deep in some, shallow in others. Deep or shallow wells go dry eventually, even if they fill again later. You will face what you cannot face. Your spine will turn to jelly, and your vaunted courage will leave you weeping in the dust. The day will come." She sounded as though she wanted to be there to see it come. Elaine gave a curt nod. She knew all about her spine turning to jelly. She fought it every day, it seemed. Tamela was speaking to Aviendha in a voice almost as satisfied as Viendra's. "Je Ito binds you like bands of steel. For Je, you make yourself exactly what is expected of you to the last hair. For To, if necessary, you will abase yourself and crawl on your belly, because you care to your bones what everyone thinks of you." Elaine nearly gasped. That was harsh and unfair. She knew something of Je Ito, but Aviendha was not like that. Yet Aviendha was nodding, much as she herself had, an impatient acceptance of what she already knew. "Fine traits to love in a first sister," Monaella said, lifting her shawl down to her elbows. "But what do you find worst in her?" Elaine shifted on her chilling knees, licked her lips before speaking. She had dreaded this. It was not just Monaella's warning. Aviendha had said they must speak the truth. Must, or what was sisterhood worth? Again the weaves held their words captive until they were done. "Aviendha," Elaine's voice said suddenly, hesitantly, She thinks violence is always the answer. At times she won't think beyond her belt knife. At times she's like a boy who won't grow up." "Elaine knows that," Aviendha's voice began, then gulped and went on in a rush. "She knows she is beautiful, knows the power it gives her over men. She exposes half her bosom sometimes in the open air, and she smiles to make men do what she wants." Elaine gaped. Aviendha thought that of her? It made her sound a light skirt. Aviendha frowned back and half opened her mouth, but Tamela pressed her shoulders again and began to speak. "You think men do not stare at your face in approval?" There was an edge in the wise one's voice. Strong was the best anyone would ever say of her face. "Do they not look at your breasts in the sweat tent? Admire your hips? You are beautiful and you know it. Deny it and deny yourself. You have taken pleasure in men's looks and smiled at them. Will you never smile at a man to give your arguments more weight, or touch his arm to distract him from the weakness of your arguments? You will, and you will be no less for it." Red flooded Aviendha's cheeks, but Elaine was having to listen to Viendra and fight blushes of her own. "There is violence in you. Deny it and deny yourself. Have you never raged and struck out? Have you never drawn blood? Have you never wished to, without considering another way, without any thought at all? While you breathe, that will be part of you." Elaine thought of time and other times, and her face felt like a furnace. This time there was more than one response. "Your arms will grow weak," Tamela was telling Aviendha. "Your legs will lose their swiftness. A youth will be able to take the knife from your hand. How will skill or ferocity avail you then? Heart and mind are the true weapons. But did you learn to use the spear in a day when you were a maiden? If you do not hone mind and heart now, you will grow old, and children will befuddle your wits. Clan chiefs will sit you in a corner to play cat's cradle, and when you speak, all will hear only the wind. Take heed while you can. Beauty flees.